Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, good.
Awesome. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that my mic is working properly.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can take a look. So you can take a look at what I am doing right here. Okay. So this is what I get when I go to Azure DevOps, which is simply dev.azure.com. And what that enables you to do is to simply go into the part of Azure DevOps where you can manage your projects, where you can start projects, manage projects, and do a whole bunch of other things. So we're not going to go very deep into this. It's going to be a very light and quick demo to let you know what you're looking at, how things are organized, because there's a lot under the surface. So the first thing you'll notice, what I like to do with people is let them take in what is on the screen and kind of understanding where things are now and then when you need to start going into other things. So the first thing you'll notice on the left-hand side is the organizations. What are organizations? Essentially, it's talking about your different instances of this product. So if, let's say I want to create another organization for a client, I can create a new organization right here on this page, and this organization will be associated with that other client. If I want to do a test project because I want a fresh environment where I want to be able to do everything from scratch, I can do the same thing here by creating a brand new organization. So it's just creating different organizations, and inside those organizations, you can have multiple projects inside, and each of those projects will have any number of services that you want to use from Azure DevOps. Now there's Azure and now there's Azure DevOps. What does it mean? Are they the same thing? No. Azure is basically where you can use what Microsoft is providing for you in order to use the cloud instead of your own data center. Now, you can also use it in conjunction with your own data center if you want to, but you don't have to. It can be completely in the cloud, or you can have a hybrid environment where you're maybe half using your own, half using something else. What you'll notice here is an ability to search on anything you want. And if you click on this one, it'll give you some quick information about what you're looking at here. So work items, pull requests, and favorites. So this is a way to be able to, let me minimize this so you can see it. So you can take a look at work items. Work items are basically tickets, and there can be different types of tickets representing different types of work that you're doing. The other thing you'll notice here is something called Marketplace. So this is a shopping bag. So you can either browse the marketplace, meaning if there is something that you want to use, which is not automatically provided for you when you create an organization and then when you create a project inside that organization, you can go to the marketplace and see what else is popular, what else is available. It's just like an app store where you go to find what else is available to you that you can play with. It also allows you, if you created some goodies that you want other people to be able to access, you can give it away for free, or you can sell your own extensions, your own little apps to help people do their jobs better, and that's what's here. And these are your initials that go here to let you know that you have, that you're logged in. So it tells you here that you're logged in and you can access your settings here. Now, inside the KK demo organization, I can create a new project. As you can see right here, I only have one project. And this tile tells you one thing. It tells you that I'm only using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the services. There's a lot of contextual menu. When you go to Azure DevOps, you'll find a lot of things which are in the contextual menu. And all that means is that until you actually hover or click on certain tiles, on certain hubs, or on whatever is clickable in front of you, you're not necessarily going to see what those things mean, but you will find it when you need it. Otherwise, it gives you a very clean look because it doesn't want to overwhelm visually what you have going on. So one of the things you'll notice about this tile, this project in this tile, is it has a few things. It has boards. What are boards? Boards are basically the methodology, the process that you decide is going to be helpful for your organization in terms of how you manage a project. Are you going to use Scrum? Are you going to use Kanban? Whatever it is you decide, you can have that kind of board there. The next thing you'll notice that this is using is repos. Repos are basically libraries. Just like in real life, you have a choice of which library you want to go to check out your book. It's the same thing with Azure DevOps. You are allowed to choose either the built-in libraries that Azure DevOps provides for you, or if you want to use something else, it allows you to connect to any other library of your choice. So let's say you're brand new to Azure DevOps, but you already had your project stored other places. It doesn't matter. This tool integrates with a lot of other libraries, and all you have to do is connect them, give them the URL, give them the path to where your other projects are stored, and it will bring it in. So it makes it very easy for you to just get started and start using it, because you don't have to do the work of having to migrate a whole lot of stuff before you can have this as a useful tool. Pipelines. Pipelines are about making sure that the project that you're working on has a way to go to production. Now, a small company may have a very simple pipeline. You have a limited number of applications that you're creating, so there's a limited number of possibilities that you want to test. But if you're a larger company, the larger the company is, the more applications that they're creating for a number of different clients, the more pipelines they're going to have. And sometimes you may want to say, well, for this product, I'm going to use this set of servers, and this is how we're going to take our project or application or product from the beginning stages all the way till when it's ready to put out into the world. That's basically what a pipeline is. The next thing you have is artifacts. What are artifacts? Artifacts are basically, it's just stuff. Things that you created. Let's say you have something which is for a health insurance company. Well, if it's a health insurance company, there's all kinds of things that they need, all kinds of things that they use, but they didn't necessarily create it. So the artifacts are a way for you to leverage a reusable piece of software, either that you created or that somebody else created. But instead of putting that along with your code, those things are not changing. So there's no reason to put those artifacts in your repository, because the repository is for things that are changing. Just like when you go to the library, you're constantly checking in a book or checking out a book, right? But if it's something that stays the same all the time, you don't really need to put that in the repository. All you have to do is keep it in the artifacts. And then you have test plans. Now, again, this is just what I'm using here in this project. It's not the end-all be-all. You can have a lot more than these 5 basic ones, but basically when you create a new project, these come by default. So the test plans could be brand new test plans that you create here, or test plans that you imported from another tool, or test plans that you're creating in conjunction with another tool. So that's the basic idea of what's going on here. If you had a ton more projects, and let's say you used a naming convention for your projects, maybe based on the team name, maybe based on the suite of applications that you're creating, you'd be able to search here, because let's imagine that this board in this this organization that we have here, we have a ton of projects. If we have, 20, 30, 50 projects, obviously you don't want to have to scroll and scroll and scroll to find what you're looking for. So you can just start typing and it'll say, oh yeah, here's the one that you're looking for. If I go to my other organization, it's going to show you that I have other projects here. So instead of me scrolling and scrolling, what I can do is come here and start looking for Mercury, right? As soon as I type the first thing, it starts finding out, okay, which one has those words in it, right? All these 3 projects have the letter L, so I can start typing anything that I want and it'll filter based on that. That way it reduces the number of searches that I have to do. To make things easier on you, your most recent project tiles are listed first. And then, it makes things easier for you. If you started a project from scratch, you're going to see it right here. But let's say it's a project that was open source and that other people had created. You will see what is the source of this project. It's going to tell you where the source is so that if you want to do any work to combine what you did with what the other person did, you can do so, or you can have that set up very easily. The next thing you'll see here is my work items. My work items are basically the kind of tickets that I have to work on. Now, depending on the role that you have in an organization, you're not going to care what all of these are because you're going to be working in your area. So if you're a developer, most of the time you're going to come to this project and you're going to click here. You're not going to care about the pipelines because that's someone else's job. That's someone else is typically referred to as a build engineer, release engineer, CI/CD engineer, DevOps engineer, etc. That's basically where you hang out. Someone who is working with the Agile methodology or is in a capacity to work as a project manager, somebody who is a product owner, a scrum master, those types of people, this is where they're going to spend most of their day, trying to keep tabs on all the projects that are going on, who's where, who is blocked with something that they're working on, and that's going to be where they are. So most times that people come here, they could not care less about all these other services. They come straight here into what they need. The person who's responsible to put this product out into the world is the person who is most likely to care about these artifacts tab. Now, it doesn't mean that the developers are not going to use it. They're going to use it, but they're not going to be the person pulling this information there. They are simply going to be provided this information and somebody else will do it for them, and they can simply take their code when they go in here for their code. They're going to be able to say, all right, I'm looking for this artifact because my code has a dependency on something that somebody else built or something that somebody in this organization or a third-party company created, and my code plugs into that, and I'm going to leverage that. But the developers themselves are not going to likely be the person who have access to this artifacts tab. And this tab actually requires a license, so all the more reason why it's usually 1 or 2 people, the administrators of the system, who would have access to be able to do this. Let's see what the question is. Okay, what is the difference between artifact and repository? Good question. So an artifact is anything that I would need. So let's say my project is doing multiplication. Now, how many times are you going to define what multiplication is? Multiplication is simply having 2 or more variables, 2 or more things, thing 1, thing 2, and you multiply them with each other. If you have 10 projects that are using multiplication, you don't want to create a multiplication function each and every time where you define what multiplication is. Take thing one, take thing two, and as long as you have two things, you multiply them with each other. You don't want to have to define that all the time. So you can create an artifact to say, listen, here's my multiplication function. Just use that as an artifact, and you can put that in its own separate box. It does not have to be in the repository. It does not have to be in the library. It's kind of like it's sort of like a shelf that doesn't change, right? Whereas things that you're going to put in your repository are things that are changing all the time. So let's say the first time that, all right, let me use this example. I have Scotch tape here. Once I make the Scotch tape, there's really nothing else I need to do. So the Scotch tape is there. Every time I need a piece, I just come here, take a piece of the Scotch tape, and put it over here. Now, when Apple was creating the iPhone, what did we have? They may have created the first version of the iPhone, but then you get the second version and the third version and the fourth version and on and on and on. So all this work that's constantly going, that you constantly have to upgrade, that there's always an update to, those are the things you're going to put in there. Things that you're getting from other sources, they will be in there. They will be in the artifacts. Here's another example. Sometimes you may have things that never really change. Let's say an XML file or some kind of file which describes, which is metadata, and it could also be another executable that comes from somebody else. You don't need to make any changes to that other product. You just need to ship them together, right? So if this is already created, and now here's my product, and I want to ship these products together, let's say these are some help files and this is my main application. Well, if the help files that I already created can still work with the latest version of my product, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, every time I ship this to my client, always also send them a copy of this. So this is what your artifact is, because your artifact can be used in many different scenarios. It's not just stuck with this particular version of the product that you want to put out. So if I decide to come in here, yes, things that are static would be the artifacts. So if I decide to come in here and I want to know the organizational setting, so this is probably the furthest that we're going to go with this in terms of complexity. I want to see, well, what does this consist of? Someone who's a developer would never care to go into this page. This is basically something that someone who's an administrator, someone who either a senior administrator or someone along those lines, that's what they would be interested in. Someone who is doing audit, someone who wants to see at a glance what's going on. So maybe compliance people, audit folks, security, they would be the people interested in this. And actually, the person who's running all of this, setting it up, they would be the kind of people interested in all of this. And this is really where you would want to start. As you'll notice in the organization setting, there's general, there's boards, and there's pipelines. So even in there, it gives you a very orderly way to look at what's going on. So under general, you have overview. And this basically tells you, well, what organization is this associated with? And what is the URL for the organization? And for Hello Kareen, it's hellokareen.visualstudio.com. Now, why does it say hellokareen.visualstudio.com? It's because it's only been literally a couple of months since what was called Visual Studio Team Services. The name got changed to Azure DevOps because Microsoft wanted to make a very firm commitment to DevOps. And so they rebranded, not simply rebranded, but they added a few more things in terms of navigation, in terms of services, and in terms of making things a little bit more streamlined. So they renamed Visual Studio Team Services, which was VSTS. They renamed that to Azure DevOps. So in the past, when you used to come here, you used to see VSTS, but now it's been rebranded as Azure DevOps. But the original name of my organization used to be hellokareen.visualstudio.com. So, and it says, well, who owns this, right? And what time zone is the person in? So you can choose the time zone that you want. And if you wanted a privacy URL, you could select that also. You can give it a description if you want. And if there's any billing information that's needed, you would scroll down a little bit to find that information. But really here, all you're getting is a 10,000-foot view of what's going on. The next thing is, well, what projects does this organization have? It could be a ton of different projects. In some very large organization, they may have this one big instance of Azure DevOps, but let's say it's a company with a ton of different subsidiaries, or a company like an insurance company, let's say a commercial insurance company. You have underwriting, you have billing, you have claims management, you have authorizations, you have business support. You have a ton of different departments, each of them doing various different things. But if they have this one instance, someone who's an administrator or someone who is in some sort of governance role with security, with compliance, they can come in here and take a look at what's going on. If you're an administrator, you can tell right away, or somebody who's a scrum master or otherwise involved in the Agile process, you're going to see, oh, they're using Agile. Okay. And is this online or not? So if there's any problems going on, if a user reports, hey, I'm having trouble getting into my project, or it blows up every time I'm on, you can take a quick look here to make sure that all your projects are behaving properly. And again, that description we saw before when we first clicked on Azure DevOps and we were at that main screen, it tells you that right there. So the next one under organization settings are policy. So what security policies you have, what authentication credentials do you have? Are you going to allow other third-party applications to access this? If you're dealing with Linux, Java applications, or other things which need SSH authentication, because even though this is a product that's developed by Microsoft, this platform allows you to develop any type of application that's going to live on any type of platform. So this is why, even from the settings here, from the basic settings here, you're able to say, all right, I want to be able to let certain applications connect to my Azure DevOps instance. That way my people can work without having to log on to this system and then log on to the other system. You can have this easy pass through of doing that. If you want to invite people to work on a project, let's say you're working on an open source project. Obviously, you're not going to be the only person working on it. You might invite a few people to work with you. So this is something you're allowing. You can also say, wait a minute, is this just for me, for my company, or am I going to allow other people to see it, other people to participate? So it'll tell you whether or not you're able to create private or public projects. So that's what you have here. So it's very simple, but it depends on what you need. Under users, you're going to see everybody who's here, what kind of access level they have, the last time they accessed it, and this will tell you what that is. In terms of access level, there's a couple of choices. You can have basic or you can have stakeholder. Now, basic makes it sound as if you would have fewer rights than somebody who's a stakeholder, but really a stakeholder, the way to think about it is, this is not somebody who's going to be in the system all the time. Once in a while, they may have a need to look at something, but they're not really going to be the person who's like knee deep into using this. So the people like that, they're like stakeholders. They're like on a need to know basis. So that's why you have that. But somebody who's actually going to be using this all the time, they're probably going to have a basic access level. So that's what this is about.
So basic meaning like everybody?
Basic is not everybody. Basic would be anyone who's like an administrator, a developer, etc. But let's say you have someone in the business who is a business analyst, let's say. That person really is not going to be doing a lot in terms of modifying things. They're not going to be modifying code, for example. They're not going to be making requests for somebody to look at their code. This is basically someone, once in a while, they're going to be looking at something, so they just need read access to confirm that something exists. It could be an auditor. Let's say you're going through an audit period. So you could give that person stakeholder access so they can review what they need to review. And after that, you blow the access away.
Okay, got it. And the next one is the security, read, write, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So here, in terms of security, there's a ton of different rights that somebody can have. So it's a collection of rights. And then inside each collection of rights, you say exactly what somebody can and cannot do. So this is where you get a lot of power. You can really, really tie things down as much as you want in order to make sure that only the right people have the right access, only the certain people can do certain things, and we'll go into what some of those mean. So let's say project collection administrator. Do you want somebody who is administering a project, do you want them to be able to modify the build resource permissions? In other words, do you want that person to be able to take developers' code and build that code? Some organizations may not want everyone to have that, but by default, if you're going to give somebody rights over a project, that means that person probably has responsibilities to do certain things. They might have to build the code themselves as a developer, or maybe the person's a build master, build engineer, DevOps engineer, and that person is the one building the code from several different developers. A developer is only cares about their unique work that they have to do, but there has to be somebody who cares about all the developers, everything that all the developers are doing, and then making sure that it's not working on only one person's desktop, but that you can take the code that other people developed and be able to create something out of it that you can then ship to your customer. So that's what this build resource permission is. You also have process permission. Can they change it from Agile to CMMI? Can they do that? Administer shelved changes. What does that mean? A developer is working on something, but then it needs to be reviewed by a lead developer, by an architect, or by somebody else. They can shelve, they can basically say, you know what, this has to be reviewed and I need to move on to something else. So I'm just going to put this on the shelf. And whenever somebody gets around to looking at it, afterwards I'll come back to it. So basically, if somebody's going to be administering a project, you want to be able to allow them to decide, all right, this is something that we were planning to send to our customers at the end of the month in November, but we decided instead we're going to push it back to the end of January. So things like that you're able to do. Administer workspaces. What are workspaces? Workspaces are basically a sandbox that you can create for yourself. Let's say you're a developer and you start developing something. And again, if you're not a developer, this is probably not going to matter to you. If you're not writing code, that's something you're never going to have to touch. So you don't even need to know those things if you're simply an administrator, but you need to know that they exist. What workspaces allow people to do is, I start coding my stuff, but then I get to a point where, 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 I get my team has made so many changes and I'm not really sure what's what anymore. And now I have spaghetti code on my hands and I want a fresh environment where I can download the code and start making changes again, because I suspect maybe the first workspace I was working in, it got corrupted. So now I want to create another workspace. So this will allow you to basically get the code again, fresh from the repo. You have the separate workspace. You can start working in it fresh, or if you want to be able to compare your workspaces and what's going on to kind of trap an error that may have happened, and you want to know, well, is this my local error or is this something that somebody else reported and I'm trying to reproduce an error? So having different workspaces allows you to do that. So you can administer a workspace, you can create trace settings, you can create a workspace, you can create a new project, you can create a process, you can delete certain fields, you can delete certain processes. So the typical things that you expect an administrator to do, they should be able to create things, they should be able to delete things, they should be able to trigger certain events, as we see here, manage build resources. The build resources mean, what machine am I going to bring in everybody's code on? And then I'm going to start running compilation. I'm going to maybe run some tests, or maybe I might use a different machine to run those tests. What are my resources when it comes to taking everybody's code and making sure that those work together? That's what your build resources are. Here for the managed test controllers, again, if you're not a tester, you really don't care. As an administrator, you may care, but if you're a developer, the managed test controller, that is something that is never going to matter to you, because you're never going to be in that space. It's basically going to be the person who is the system administrator here or works in the test team. Trigger events. Now, there are people who are not in the system all the time, but you want to be able to trigger certain things to happen. So obviously, if you're saying that the person has, you're giving the person permission as a collection administrator, you also want that person to be able to send certain alerts, certain notifications, and this is where you give the person that permission. Now, if I'm able to create and manage a build resource, well, that means I should be able to use it, not simply manage it, and I should be able to view it, and I should be able to do a whole bunch of other things besides. So you can come in here and change those things. And again, anytime you look into any of the groups here, is going to really define, well, what is somebody able to do when you give them these permissions? By default, some permissions are allowed, some are not allowed, and some are not set. Sometimes things are allowed from the get-go, but there are certain other permissions underneath that can be triggered under that. And if you don't set those permissions, it will automatically inherit the parent permission. Whereas there are certain other permissions, you don't get that by default. It's not set as something that's allowed or something that's forbidden. It's just not set. And if you decide that you want to give them those extra permissions, you can do so. Now, administer shelf changes. If you're the person who is building the code, you really have no business shelving changes. In other words, deciding, well, we're going to put this on the side and we'll come back to it at the end of January. You don't need to do that, because that is your distinct job. However, in a lot of organizations, the person who is the project administrator, especially if it's a small team, if you're at a startup, the smaller the company, the more you're wearing all these hats, you may need to have that permission. So what you would need to do is, if you're already in this group, you already have that by default, so you don't need to come in here in the project collection build administrator group and change that. You're going to have that by default. You're not going to use your higher privilege. And this is really for an organization where the person who's the build administrator is not the same person who is a collection administrator. So that means their job is very, very, very defined, and you may want to give them the permission, Or if they're part of a very huge group where there are several build engineers, then they're not going to need that because obviously someone else is taking care of it, and you want to have that separation of concerns. Same thing here, proxy service. Excuse me. What are they able to do? You'll notice that these are pretty much the same types of permissions that we saw before. It's just that if you put somebody in certain groups, then they either will automatically have certain permissions, will not automatically have certain permissions, they will automatically inherit certain permissions, and in other cases, they may not have those permissions set as either or, and you have the privilege of deciding which one it is. Let's talk about service accounts. When you have individual accounts, obviously you have to change your password every 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Some places have 180 days. And there are organizations also where your password changes on a daily basis or every time you access the system. It all depends on what you want to do. So obviously, if I have something that I'm running, I can't run it under my own ID. It's better to create a service account, which is a very, it's a powerful account, but it's also extremely limited in what it's allowed to do. So if you create a service account, basically that account is what's going to run all the jobs that you have. So if you have a ton of jobs that you have to run, it's not going to run under your personal ID. It's going to run under the service account ID. So again, this allows you to say, well, I have a whole bunch of service accounts. What kind of permissions do I want that service account to have? You see a lot of the permissions here for the service account are set to allow. Why? That's because the service account is basically supposed to be able to run things on its own. And you're not going to have much in the way of automation if you don't allow the service account to do certain things. It's basically a robot that you're setting up in order to do certain things for you. So that means it has certain permissions. Even though it has certain permissions, that service account, it's very defined in terms of what it's going to do, what jobs it's going to run. And beyond that, it doesn't have more. For testing purposes, you can set up different service accounts. You don't really have to, but if you want to create a whole separate thing because it's a whole different team that's doing it, then that's fine. You can just go ahead and create some users and groups under this type of group. Valid users. Valid users is basically everybody in the world that you open up your organization to. Now, do you want everybody in the world to be able to do everything? No, because some people are project managers, some people are business analysts, product owners, people who are managers of other teams, infrastructure, etc. So it's just saying, is this person a part of my organization? Or if the person is not a part of my organization, is this somebody that I invited to participate in this project? So that's why valid users, you can see it does not have much in terms of things that are automatically allowed. Basically, the only thing they can do is create a workspace. They can check to see that the build resources exist, and they can see some basic information about the organization, but that's really it. They can't see anything. They cannot do anything. In order for a valid user to be able to do anything, that person also has to be added to one or more of these other groups. And the security service group, this is something that is not very often used at all. But if you were not part of any group, let's say you were just dropped in from the sky, then most likely you're going to be sent here if you're not part of any of these other groups. Most often, somebody who has access to this will need to have one of these types of permissions. So we went kind of deep in security here, but This goes to show you how secure it is. A lot of people are afraid of things which are quote unquote in the cloud. I don't control it. It's under somebody else's control, and they get scared. But you actually have a ton of power in terms of what you're willing to allow, what you're not willing to allow. It's just that the data center is not in your building. It's somewhere else. Notifications. Notifications can be email notifications from you to someone else, or it can be done every time a certain action happens. So let's say, today is November 19th. Let's say I have something going out at the end of the month. Well, I barely have 10 days left until the end of the month. So I'm, let's say I'm this project manager, I have white knuckles and I'm trying to figure out, when is this going to be done? Is everything good? Is everything passing all the time? And I want to know anytime this completes, I want to get a notification about it. Well, you can go crazy with how many notifications you want and what kind of notifications you want. Do you want to know every time something's completed? Well, that can become overwhelmed and you can get lost in that sea of information. Maybe you don't want a notification every time somebody builds a programmer's code. Maybe you only want a notification when something fails. Because if you're getting a notification every time it completes, well, it can complete fully successful, it can be succeeded, partially succeeded, or failed. So if you're not specifying which one you want, you're going to have a bunch of emails in your inbox with all three types of build completions, with all three types of statuses. And you don't care about all three types. You only care if something has failed. So don't set it up so that you get all these notifications and you get buried. And especially when you're trying to troubleshoot something, then you have to go through all these emails to try and figure out when something last happened. You don't want that. So to make life easier on yourself, you may want to have only some of them, but not all of them. And, if certain things have failed, right? If certain things have moved, so it gives you some type of level of the notifications you want. And there are groups of notifications that you can select. And then if you want to figure out, well, who is subscribing to those? If you're an administrator, you may want to know, well, how many project managers are trying to find out when the build is complete? All you have to do is go to subscribers and find out about that, and you can get the statistics also about it. Or if you want to say, you know what, we're going to turn off notifications. There's way too much going on. It's generating too much. And right now we're at a point in the development, maybe we're very early in the development and there's really nothing to phone home about. There's no news. So we're not going to deliver any notifications. That's a choice you have also. And all that is here.
Okay, got it, Karin. These are all related to the organization, not related to one particular project, right?
Correct. So okay. This is at a very high level.
Can you go to the security section again?
Yep.
So if you click so all these permissions that you have, right? These on the right-hand side, extreme right-hand side, these are all related to that particular project within the create group section column, right?
Yes.
Okay, so these are also at the organization level.
These are at the organization level. So you can set up permissions at the organization. You're able to see what's going on at the organization level. So for your build service accounts, there are certain things you'll be able to do with those accounts and certain things you're not going to be able to do.
Yeah,
so,
but then the security might be different for each project, right?
Not necessarily. You can decide this is going to be the rules of the road for my organization.
Okay.
If you want to decide something outside of this, then you can simply create a new group and you can explicitly say, well, this is the group that I want for this project and I want people to have these particular sets.
Okay, so these are the out of the box things. I can create my own. Oh,
yep.
Okay, got it. I got it.
So if you want to have a set, if you want to take what comes out of the box and that's what everybody has to live under, that's fine. Many times organizations decide to create their own groups because that gives you finer control over what's there. But these already have the best practices that you can probably follow, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and you don't need to wait to create your own set of permissions before you can start making this work for you.
And people do use the out of the box more, or people go for creating their own in the
in a small organization, startups, maybe up to like $50 million, $100 million companies, they typically do. But when you're dealing with larger organizations, they definitely have more groups, more sets of permissions that they use.
Okay.
And it could be depending on the industry that an organization is in, they may have some legal requirements from the government in terms of what access people should have or should not have. So if you want to make it extremely fine-tuned, where you control every little thing, and this is not what you're looking for, that's completely fine. Usually what they will do is create another set of permissions, because you want to be able to go back to, well, how if you always want to be able to reference what's in the box versus what you want, the better thing to do is to create your own group and either mimic the set of permissions you see there or change a few of them. But if you leave these alone, then you're always going to know, well, listen, out of the box, administer build resource permissions is not set. Do you want to allow it, or do you want to explicitly deny?
Okay.
So if that's the case, simply by clicking here, just one tap of the finger, leave it as not set, leave it as allow, leave it as deny. But
okay, so these permissionings are all related to the resource access, right?
yeah, so this one
is nothing to do with the application access.
Correct. This is simply when you go to build the source code.
Got it. Yeah.
All the different developers.
Okay.
Do you want this build service account, excuse me, to also be able to modify different resources? For example, do you want it to be able to modify whether or not it's using, the version 1 or the version 2 of something else? You don't really want a service account to decide what version of a utility is going to be used. You want an actual administrator, a real human person, to have that kind of access, because you can trace exactly who did it. But if you let a service account do it, well, whoever has the password for the service account will be able to use that, and you're not going to be able to know who did it. But if you only let individual people have that kind of permission, then you can know specifically who did something, who changed that resource, etc., who modified that resource. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So next thing is the extensions. And again, we were talking about the shopping backup here, which has to do with extensions that you have. So in this project, there's only 2 extensions installed. Can there be more? Yes. And as you are adding more, you can come here and add more, and it will tell you what that is. Manage means the extensions that you already, the additional apps, the additional plugins. You can think of these, let's say WordPress has plugins. This is the equivalent of that, except that it's in here, it's in the marketplace. And if you were to go to the Atlassian suite, which is a competitor of this product, you would see the same thing. You would see the extensions there, which are from other people, either other people or other organizations that decided to make that available free or for a cost. Now, not anybody can go to the marketplace. Everybody will have access to that marketplace, and you'll be able to say, oh, this looks cool. This looks like something that I could use to make my work a little bit easier, or to give me more visibility into what's going on. Well, just because you want something from the marketplace, even if it's free, it doesn't mean that you have the permissions to install it in the organization. So anybody can make a request. And if there were people who requested things and you're the administrator, you can come in here and say, oh, so-and-so wanted code search. All right, fine. Somebody wanted SonarQube. Okay, fine. I'll request it. And because, again, some of these are not free. You have to pay money. So it has to be somebody who has the permission to authorize that purchase. And that's where you would come into, people from this department or that department requested things, and this is where you're able to manage their requests, either grant them or deny them. Usage. So this is really history in terms of who did what agent did they use, what time did they do it, what service were they using, and what application was it, what comment did they make, and what is the status. So it has a lot of different information about the history, so you can really judge what somebody was doing. So if you are doing some sort of audit, if you're doing some sort of troubleshooting, this may be something which you can try to follow to see if it has any relevance into what you're doing. So that's really all that is. And then we get into the board section of the organizational settings. And under here, you'll see process. Process means, what am I using to manage my project? Am I using a very basic Agile function, or am I using Scrum, or am I using CMMI? Believe it or not, there's still a lot of organizations who are using CMMI. They are not Agile at all. But even though they're not Agile, there is a methodology, there is a process that they are following, and it could be that. But you can see that all the projects that I have, everything's using Agile. If you want to use Scrum, that's fine too. But this is the at a glance for you to let you know, what are my people using in my organizations. All right, so this is where the fun begins with the pipelines. And this will be the last thing we cover today. Next time we can go into more detail about what's going on. In the pipelines is where all the magic happens. Pools. What are pools? Well, when you're using the cloud, you can use...
Wait, Corinne. So what kind of things happen in pipelines?
I said that's where all the magic happens.
Meaning,
the reason to use the cloud is to free up your resources. Or if you don't have resources at all and you want to start a project, well, you don't have to buy 10 servers, because there are servers that come to you by default as a result of using the cloud. So let's say you are a 2 or 3 team shop. Obviously, you're not going to invest in a $50,000 server, because you're just 2 or 3 people who are working together trying to get an app up and running, right? So instead of going out and purchasing your own $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 server, you say, oh, you know what? I can use one of these that Microsoft provides for me out of the box in Azure DevOps, and that's what I'll use instead. Now, many enterprise companies, of course, they already have their own data center. Of course, they already have their own servers that they've been using forever and a day. So those people will have their own agents. Agents is another name for the machine. So obviously, if you're more than one person, if you're a team, you're going to need more than one machine, and you may need more than one type of machine. So this is what allows you to say, all right, for this work I'm doing here, I'm going to use Linux, I'm going to use Mac OS, I'm going to use Ubuntu, or I'm going to use VS 2017, et cetera, et cetera. Or if you want to use containers, that's there also. So that tells you, when I'm trying to create a build for an application, which is, let's say it's an Angular application, well, what am I going to use instead? If I'm going to use something that is a C# application, well, chances are I'm going to use this one. This just gives you the option of using certain types of servers which are already defined for you, which already come with certain capabilities. And that enables you to say, all right, this is what I'm going to do with it. So here's an example of one. We just picked one. And anytime you pick on this, it'll give you more information. It's going to tell you, well, have you actually run any jobs? No, I'm not doing anything with Ubuntu. So if you click on here, you're not going to see anything. But if you go to default, you're going to see the information about that. You're going to see it's online. sometimes these do go down. It could be what's provided for you out of the box, or it could be one of your own servers. So if the agent that's on there that's communicating between Azure DevOps and the machine that's actually running your stuff, if that communication gets, it goes offline for whatever reason, maybe the server went down or something happened and it's temporarily offline, you're going to see that right here. And it's going to tell you, well, what is the state? Is it online or is it offline? And whether it's idle or not. Is anybody running anything on the server right now? So let's say I'm in a pinch and I want to run something, and typically I'm running it here or here, but I need something because I need to, let's say I have a production issue and I want to address it right away. So I want to know, well, is there anything that's idle right now, that's online but idle, that I could use to run my stuff? So that's what you have. And over here, one thing I wanted to, hang on one second. So when you look at, hang on. If you ever decided you wanted to delete that, that's something you can have also. That's something you'd be able to see here. What was your question?
No, I was going to ask you, like you said that this can be used for any technologies, right? It can be ASP.NET or Java or anything, right?
Yes.
Can it be, I'm sorry, can it be used for PeopleSoft applications?
I don't see why not. What we could do is potentially go to the marketplace and look for something for PeopleSoft. But I suspect that it does. I suspect that you probably can.
Okay.
So let's take a look right now. Browse the marketplace. And we look for PeopleSoft. And it doesn't return anything for PeopleSoft. You can decide to build your own or publish. So if at any point PeopleSoft decided to make their tools available, all they need to do is come here and publish it. And as you can see, there's a lot of things are free, but there are some things that have a free trial. And there are some things which definitely cost money. And you can sort by what you want. So let's say you wanted this item, which is modern requirements for TFS. If it's something that tickles your fancy and you feel this is something you need, then you can come in here and get started, and then you can purchase it. But that particular one is not something which is available. So what we're going to do is go back to our organization. All right. So here's one thing that I wanted to show you in terms of these agents. Last thing I want to talk about here before we go to the deployment polls. So you have the roles and you have the details and everything else in the agents, and inside each of these tabs, you're going to see more information, but this gives you the overview. This tells you, well, I've already used this hosted agent pool. Well, what have I used it for? And it tells you, it gives you the ID, and it's just sequential, so it's really nothing to worry about. It tells you whether it passed or failed, and it tells you, well, what action was the person trying to do? Oh, they were trying to run a build, or they were trying to release a project. What is the pipeline? What is the name of the project that they were using this for? I could use it for multiple different things. In one case, I was using it for this. In another case, I was using it for something else. And the name really is the release name. So different people have different naming conventions for how you track the products that you release. So this is what the name is all about here. And it tells you what date it happened, when it was assigned, what time it started, what time it finished, what sort of tools. So, you know, when you're running a job on a machine, it can use different tools, different applications that were on that machine. So it'll tell you, well, which ones of these services did it actually touch in the process of running this job for you. So this also tells you, well, what kind of capabilities does it have? Capabilities are nothing more than things that are installed on this machine. So if you look at, let's say I decided to add an agent, a private agent, for a machine that I have, because let's say I'm working on a legacy application and it's not something that Microsoft supports out of the box. Obviously, if I come in here, it's not going to have those things. But if I define my own agent pool on the machine that I have in my company, I can say, oh, you know what? I had installed this. So now when I come in here, I'm going to be able to see, oh, it has this installed, and it has that installed, and it has that installed. So this is not something you fill out manually. It's just that once you create an agent and you connect that agent to Azure DevOps, everything that you would see in the add remove program section on that computer, now you're going to be able to see it where it says user capabilities. So this really gives you, as an administrator, a view into not just what's on the cloud platform, but also what you have on your connected machines in your organization. So that's really pretty cool. Now, deployment pools is basically what machines are you using? If you are a small company, again, you're not going to have a ton of machines that you're deploying to. It could be, you know, dev, QA, stage, and production, perhaps, or integration, but you're not going to have much. But if you're a huge company, chances are you literally have dozens, if not hundreds, of servers. Well, which ones are you using for which applications? And you can pull those things together to say, all right, this is what I'm using for this application. This set is what I'm using for another application. And this is where you would find that here. Retention and parallel job. It's very important. I mean, one of the pain points that administrators always had, even if you're not a system administrator, but if you're the owner of a machine, one of the things that you always had to be concerned about is keeping your environment clean and uncluttered. And sometimes it got a little bit out of hand because people would create these things, and after they're done, they would not get rid of them. And people were not tracking everything that they had. So as a result, you would not necessarily know, is this important? Do I need to keep it? Do I not want to keep it? With this system, what you're able to do is say, well, how many days do you want to keep it? If you create something, how many days do you want to retain this job? And what's the minimum? So let's say you want to keep the last 10, you want to keep the last 20, whatever it may be, it lets you do that. And it gives you the maximum days that it will delete, that it will keep something, and the minimum number that it's going to keep. It's usually 10. If you want to increase it, decrease it, that's definitely up to you, but this is something that you would have here. If you want to do parallel jobs, let's say you have some free projects and you have some things that are hosted and so on, this is where you would get some information on there. But really the portion that people use most often is not in parallel jobs. It's simply, what is your policy that you want to do? And OAuth configurations, those are for third-party applications that you want to have connected to your instance of Azure DevOps. That way you're not going back and forth, always logging in, being prompted for your password. So if there's anything like that you happen to want to have connected or that you did connect, you're going to see this configuration right here. So this is what we have for organizational settings. And what we're going to do next time is we can actually go into an actual project. And these services that you see down here on this tile, you're going to find information about that here. And as you click on a hub, these are called hubs, it's going to give you the menu, the submenu inside each one. So repos, you have a submenu under repos. Pipelines, you have a submenu under pipelines. You see that this is bold, and then you have different things here underneath it. And if anything changed in terms of the source code, you'll see all of that here. But basically, what you have is everything that you need, everything that you're using in this hub for something, it's here. And this screen here appears very busy. This is where things start to get overwhelming for people, because as they're looking into different things, then there's all this extra stuff that all of a sudden pops up. But you'll see that there's a lot of learn more associated with this. So you don't ever really need to be scared about anything. You can simply take a look at what's there, and then you can click on it. And once you click on the ellipsis, it lets you see what additional options you have, what additional menus exist for each one of those things. So we will leave it there for now. And that's what I wanted to share as of today. And that's really it. I'm going to end the meeting and we will continue the conversation elsewhere. Any questions on what we just saw, by the way?
No, looks good. Only thing is if you can find out about the PeopleSoft connection.
It doesn't have one out of the box, so that's something Microsoft would have to create. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, there are some third-party companies. I know TaskTop is one of them, that sometimes they do create something. It may not be in the marketplace, but it can be another provider that helps bring that together. And also, you always have the option of manually creating something. So even though you don't see something in the marketplace, but let's say you have some scripts that you typically run, and you run them on the command line, let's say. What you're able to do is create kind of I don't want to say container because container has a specific meaning. You can basically create a wrapper to contain that process that does not automatically gets run by default on this platform. And then you can make calls to that script. You can run that script, so whatever command you would typically pass in, that's something you can do from there also. All right. So I'm going to end this and let it continue to do the recording, and then I'll upload the recording for you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.